I know you'll know this, but for kind of listeners who've not come across it before, and dive in kind of with your kind of view and take on this. So the internal thinker and the external thinker, assuming they've broadly got the same IQ, will think at the same speed, process a problem or a request to speak on an impromptu basis at the same speed. It's just the internal thinker will need to go into themselves to internally process and then speak, whereas the external thinker literally needs to verbalize their thought process. They need to hear themselves thinking to know what they think. How does this play out with impromptu speaking? I guess particularly, maybe this is a question to help me personally. Any tips for the internal thinkers in particular? Because if I'm asked maybe a question I'm not prepared for, I would naturally want to just pause, stand there, process, and then speak. Where it can sometimes, maybe this is wrong, it's my perception as an internal thinker, it appears that it might be easier for the external thinker because they can naturally feel for themselves while they're just thinking out loud. So what are your thoughts, tips, suggestions on that?
Yeah, so this is a very intriguing question, one that is asked often. It comes in different guises. Sometimes it's introvert versus extrovert.
Yeah.
Essentially, what you're asking is, what's the difference between thinking then speaking or speaking then thinking, right? And there are advantages and disadvantages to both. You know, many people who are internal thinkers or introverts feel that they are at a disadvantage in most communication situations. Yet the research actually shows that's not true. Introverts, those who reflect before speaking, tend to provide more meaningful communication, more concise communication, communication that is more interpersonally connected. Those are all very, very valuable things. So this notion of thinking before speaking, internal speaking, thinking is really, really important. The extroverts, those who speak then think, they tend to process externally. So we all hear their thoughts. So sometimes they tend to ramble. Sometimes they tend to disconnect because they're in their heads as they're speaking. So it's not always wonderful, right? It's not always that perfect panacea that many of us see. The reality is this: we need to, one, be aware of what our approach is so we can hone and develop it.
Yeah.
It's not about becoming like the other. It's about maturing and honing the way we approach it and being comfortable doing so. So I don't think one is better than the other. If you are somebody who needs time to think, as I mentioned earlier, find ways to give yourself time. Get comfortable with silence. So pausing for a moment, even announcing that, say, I'm going to think about that for just a second, and pause.
Yeah, I love that.
Or asking a clarifying question or paraphrasing, as I mentioned before. All of those are tools to buy yourself a little bit of time. Now, if you're somebody who speaks before you think, then I'd love for you to read in my book the parts where I talk about structure and framework. So as you are speaking, you will speak in a way that packages up your information clearly for those listening. Because again, those who speak then think often ramble. They often list information, and that can distract and make it difficult for your listeners. So either side of that continuum has some challenges and some opportunities to become more clear in their speaking.